the handheld GPS devices kind of became a paperweight, if you will.
Just give it a little more exaggeration so I can be like, okay.
A yellow bear waypoint to me says, I want to look into this more. I want to hunt this. I want to bear hunt this someday.
Welcome to the Built to Hunt podcast, brought to you by the team of hunt advisors at the Huntin magazine, where we are dedicated to helping our members go on more hunts with better information. Join Huntin today at huntinfool.com.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Built to Hunt podcast. Isaiah Joner here with Garth Jensen, and we also have Dylan Dowson from onX tuned in today. So we're coming at you with just kind of a mapping podcast on how we do our research planning for a hunt. I know for the past 10, 12 years, it's been a huge part of planning my own hunts. Started way back when with paper maps onto Google Earth and some overlays, and then as onX has developed majorly over the last decade, that's played a huge role in how I kind of figure out where I want to go. So hopefully, we give you some bits and pieces and some tips and insights on what helps us make our own hunt successful each year.
Yeah, I know just this morning it was funny. I was on the phone when we were supposed to record this podcast, and I was talking to an individual, and now this isn't how I would scout the unit, but he had put in for an antelope unit in Wyoming that was basically private land only. I mean, the limitations provided by the state was you can only hunt on irrigated land within a certain demographic of the unit. And I was just fully prepared to let him know, I talked to a landowner. Talk to somebody that's over there complaining about antelope. That's the only way you're going to get on there, because basically there's no public land there within there to hunt. Until I looked at onX and I just pulled it up, and I'm like, actually, there are walk-in access areas that you can actually go into that are enrolled in that, which prior to that being available, I can't even, the just trying to figure those out years ago, and I pulled it up in 5 minutes, and I was like, oh yeah, this one right here and this one right here, just make sure, when Wyoming comes out with their new walk-in access areas in the next few days, these are a part of it, but typically they don't change. And so he was happy, he was excited, and I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, without some of the advancements we've had in that mapping technology, what do you do, Knock on doors.
Yeah, and those things for sure. And luckily with antelope, I've found success with that, knocking on doors. Usually it's like, hey, go find a couple buddies that have tags as well, because we have too many antelope, contrary to deer and elk, obviously. But I mean, those, walk-in areas in Montana, block management, etc., all that information existed, but it was difficult to find. Like, you could go to the county assessor's office, find plat maps for your county, find the boundaries, find those walk-in areas, etc. But it's just having it all, like you said, Garth, just, I'm going to pull up my phone and then I just see it right there. I mean, that's really where it changes the game, because all that information did exist. It just lived in 30 different places, and would take you a couple hours of research to find that out.
Yep. Do you know how many layers you guys have for trails, roads, land ownership,
fires?
Yeah. I know back in the day when it started, it was literally topo, aerial, and then land ownership. But now there's it seems like the sky's the limit there.
Yeah.
We're actually trying to not limit the amount of layers, but simplify things down. So a lot of what you just said is now baked into the base maps. So you have 4 options, I guess, for base maps. You have the topo base map, the aerial imagery base map, and then a hybrid, which is the imagery with topo overlaid. And then now 3D, of course. But really, we've baked a lot of that information, or some of that information, into those base maps. So we're trying to limit, scrolling through layers and there being 300 different layers that you can turn on, because frankly, it's a little overwhelming. Even if you're in the app daily, like I am, that's just a lot to manage. So off the top of my head, I don't know exactly how many, but there's a lot. I mean, there's still dozens, especially when you look at each state has their own, whether it's walk-in, whether it's block management, whether it's, in Colorado having like species, travel corridors and stuff. There's so many nuance layers and data available for that particular state, that there gets to be quite a bit. I mean, just yesterday, I had Christy Titus shoot me a text, and she's in Wyoming, and there's a special bear baiting unit like GMUs, but for bear baiting. I didn't even know existed because I've never bear hunted Wyoming, and we're looking at now, since we know that data exists, we're looking at putting that into the app as well. So each state has its own thing, or a lot of the similar things like the walk-in to block management. They just call them different.
Yep.
It's just different nomenclature is all that is. But there's a lot, like you said. I mean, historic wildfire, current wildfire, like active wildfires, roadless areas, drought conditions. I mean, the list goes on and on. Tree cover layers. So that's kind of a new one last year, that I haven't used a ton for Western hunting, but I'm I'm intrigued to learn more about tree cover and canopy and figure out like, okay, how does that affect my hunts? And you guys might know more than I do on that, but you can see the tree density, what the primary like tree species is for an area, the age group, and so on and so forth. So it'll be interesting to go back and look at all of my waypoints and figure out, okay, like elk bedding areas, I have all these waypoints, all this data for the past 10 years. Now I'm going to turn that layer on and figure out, okay, what does this mean? I'm not really well versed in, you know, tree species and canopy density and age and that type of thing. But with the data that I have for, again, using bedding areas as an example, like it might help make sense, looking at that layer of like, okay, most of the bedding areas are within this tree species and like this age group. So I'm going to find similar ones on a different mountain range and use that for e-scouting and stuff. So there's a lot of new data coming into the app, and um, yeah, some of it's super helpful, and folks use it every day, like private and public. And some of it is, I might turn it on twice a year, but the 2 times a year that I turn it on, it's going to really benefit me.
That's the one thing you were talking about. I've looked at that that canopy layer on there, and I haven't done it yet. But I was, that aspect of it, I thought, man, that is something that really, if you start to see a pattern there, could change it, and you could start looking at different areas with that, with that layer in a different way, instead of just going through and searching, looking, okay, this is a north slope, this has this type of cover, like it's pretty dense in here, but just depending on how that tree cover overlay, if you start to see a pattern, it could change a lot of how you scout areas.
Yeah, no, I've been using it more as a tool the last couple of years, especially as you guys have rolled out some of these layers, like with the crops. Like last year in Montana, with that crop layer, I did a little research before I went on the hunt, but then I was there, and there would be literally 0 deer in one field and like 50 to hundreds in another. And I was like, all right, throw on my layer. What are they after right here? And then, I mean, I couldn't hunt it because it was private, but it's stuff you can start to mark and build, actual data on. Same with like if I'm hiking around the woods, spring bear hunting, and I'm finding elk rubs or a lot of elk sign, just getting in the habit of dropping a pin.
Mm-hmm.
I've been taking pictures just so like it's a mental reminder, like, oh, that was that right there. And starting to actually build more of a portfolio of all these waypoints that, can be beneficial on future hunts. So
Yeah, and it's so important to do that, to take like an extra 5 seconds and take a photo or name it, throw in some notes. Like we have a bunch of different colors, and which you guys know, but some listeners might not. And so when you mark a waypoint, it's a red X, and it'll have the location and the timestamp, and that's great if you're on the fly and really in a hurry or something. But it's so beneficial to, like you said, Isaiah, take a photo or mark some notes in there, like what were you thinking, what did you see, why did you mark this? Because I've got 1,000+ waypoints on my phone right now, and a lot of them are red X's that were 3-4 years ago, and it's like I'm sure, I'm sure it meant something at the time, but 3 years later, unless it really is a spot that I'm tied to, I'm like, I might just delete that because I don't know what I was thinking at the time. So, to use the different colors. So like you can do a lot of things with the color schemes. For me, I do so any area that I've e-scouted or like driven down the interstate, looked up and been like, man, that looks like a really good bear spot. I'll mark it in yellow.
Yep.
So like as I pan around my map, any yellow waypoint is like one that I've not been to. It's like a yellow bear waypoint to me says, I want to look into this more. I want to hunt this. I want to bear hunt this someday, but I haven't personally been there. Now, if I go hunt it, if it's great, if I like what I see, I'll change that color to, maybe a red or a brown or what have you. If I don't like it, then I might just delete that waypoint. But a lot of guys are doing it by species. So elk waypoints will be a certain color, deer waypoints will be another. Like there's some areas, some units that I hunt elk and deer in the same unit. And zoom in, it's just like just crazy waypoints everywhere. And it's like, was that elk? Was that deer? I don't really know. So excuse me, that's one way that can help. Obviously you have the custom icons where you can name it like a wallow, or not name it, but choose the icon that's for a wallow, feeding area, bedding area, etc. One of the cool things we're doing this year, and we have a little bit of work to do on it still, but is folders. So you can now actually take all that data and put it into folders. So I could have like elk 2022, like that's a folder. All those waypoints that I create this year for scouting and in the field dump right into that elk 2022 folder. So then I can turn that folder on and off by year, just, really help organize things. Cause again, I have 1,000 waypoints, and, if you zoom out on the map, it's hard to see the map sometimes. So I'll start to organize those in folders specific to species and year. And then you can also share those out too eventually. So, that capability exists right now, but like I said, we have a couple fine-tuned tweaks to implement. But essentially, if you guys and I are hunting the same unit in Montana, I can put all that units, waypoints, tracks, lines, etc., into a folder, and then just share you the folder. So it's no longer, hey, I've got 12 waypoints I want to share you. So you're going to get 12 different text messages and have to click each one. We've
And
all been
usually
there,
the
and
most
it's,
important one you don't open up.
Yeah.
yep, exactly. And we've all been there. It's a pain. It's a hassle. It's a great tool for like, hey, let's meet at this trailhead, or like, sending my wife a couple waypoints. Hey, I'm going to be generally in this area, if not this area, just for safety features. But like, hey, we're going to hunt this unit in Montana. I've hunted it. I've got data. Here's a whole folder. Like, let's meet here, and then, now everything that's in my map is now in your guys's.
Dude, I like if me and Dylan swap maps or swap logins there, and it would be the most confusing thing ever, because everything that I mark is red until I've proven it and been there and seen things, and then if it's a dud, I'll turn it black, and if it's good, I'll turn it yellow. He'd be like, God, I got all these yellow waypoints. Like, he's marked a lot of stuff, but he hasn't been anywhere.
Does,
No,
it,
and I
does,
like
Garth, does Garth even hunt?
yeah.
I do think it's important to keep, the waypoints on areas that suck, because then you can kind of use that data. But I've been even like going back in time and putting in like the date or the time I killed that animal, and marking all my kills or kills I've been on in black. I'm the same way. Like yellow stuff that looks good. Purple is my like, I have to go here someday. It looks too good to pass up.
Yeah.
But I do like. I think it was recently you guys came out where you put the kind of the notes front facing on the waypoints,
Yep.
which makes it super nice when you're searching around.
Yep.
Because you used to be able to have to click on each waypoint. And be
Yeah,
like,
I
what does this
noticed
say?
that too. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, so right now that's on the computer, on the desktop. Not in the phone yet, but we're trying to figure out, how to do it in the phone. So it doesn't take up a lot, obviously on the computer that's great, big screen. On your
Yeah.
phone, like we're trying to figure out ways to do that without taking up a lot of real estate on the map, but definitely working through that, because that was one of those things for me. I didn't really know that I needed until I saw it. And then I was like, yeah, I need this. This is like so much nicer than clicking on each one. And it will make me go in and name all those, because I still have a lot that are like time and date,
Nope.
and that's fine. But going in and naming it like, you know, good elk wallow, like fresh sign or something like that, is just a lot more impactful. But yeah, just finding better ways to manage that content, because especially as we get more and more, it's like we need to manage this before it gets too out of hand.
It got to the point where I had to start making notes on certain things because you can only have so many wallows, so many glassing points, like so many things that are marked water hole or seep until you have to start taking a picture, so you can remember, okay, what did that look like? Like, what was I staring at here when I took this? Because what's going to differentiate that from something else, man, that might be totally different when it comes right down to it. It's like, well, this is what I was looking for. I will, like what I started to do on a lot of my water holes. Like I was researching an antelope unit, and basically you could, I could zoom over, and everywhere I saw a dirt tank or a water hole, I would, hit it. It was red. Then me and Jonah, I'm sure he was sick and tired of it by the end of the day. But we drove that almost the entire day unit on some of the worst roads ever.
In a 1-ton pickup.
In a 1-ton diesel. But when I would come across those and it was dry, I'd black it. It's still a water hole, so it could, at some point in time, if you got some rain, it could retain it. But I'd mark it black, and then the other ones I'd mark yellow, or blue, excuse me, if they actually had them. And then ones I didn't get to, I'd leave red. But then I would started making notes. I'm like, okay, well, I have all these blue ones. I know there was water. Well, how much water was there? I can't even remember at that point. Like, was it just a trickle in the bottom of that? Or was it like a pretty sustainable water source? Where it's like, yeah, this is going to be here when my hunt rolls around, even if we don't get any rain. So that's where it got to the point where I had to start making notes, taking photos, organizing it a little bit better so I could, remember once I got into the field how to do that.
Yeah, for sure. And with the folder capability too, just being able to turn those off. Like, you might not need those water hole waypoints for another 4 years. Maybe that's a hunt you do every year, but if it's every 4, who knows, you might never go back there. But if you do, then you have that data, but you might not want to see it on your map at all times.
Yeah.
So then throw it in a folder and turn it off, and just hide it from the map. But yeah, no, I hear you there. I've got a lot of different content that needs to be organized a little bit better.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing I was just in talking to Dylan the other day that I didn't know you guys had, and I think it's a recent update anyways, but when you're getting to some of these areas that don't have a lot of topography, but you're looking for any little aspect of a glassing point where you can get up just high enough to where you can oversee, it's pretty important. I mean, that's everyone's looking for a little bit higher point where they can see more country. And now with that exaggeration tool that you guys have on there, that's the one thing that now when I jump in there, I automatically just kick it up a little bit. Just give it a little more exaggeration so I can be like, okay.
So you're not shocked when you show up?
Yeah, when I look up there and I'm like, I swear to hell, this is not what it looked like on the map.
Yeah, we've all been there when you show up, and yeah, same thing. You look up and you're like, that's not what 3D imagery looks like. It's about eight times longer and steeper. But no, that exaggeration is really big, because I mean, even in the breaks in Montana, like I elk hunt the breaks quite a bit in Montana, and you get there and you're like, there's a lot of topography here. It's not flat by any means. But if you look at a topo map or even just standard 3D for that country, it really just doesn't show up. Like, you might see some rolls and some topo lines with ridges and stuff, but you'd look at that from 3D or topo and be like, yeah, it's relatively flat country, with some rolls and a couple of canyons, whatever. But then when you're standing there on the edge of the breaks, you're like, no, this is more intense than what it looked like. And so that 3D exaggeration is going to come really in handy for country like that. As well as even whitetail hunters, like looking for a creek bottom, a way to get in and out of a stand. And I know that doesn't really pertain to us, but there's a lot of areas in the country that, is more flat, but there are some creek drainages and stuff that hunters can utilize. They just need to know that they exist. So that 3D exaggeration is a pretty cool feature as well.
What would you say, I mean, there's so many species layers to scout for. What would you say your favorite species to e-scout for is, and what's the top layer you like to target doing that?
That's a good question. I mean, it's gonna sound, it's like the typical answer, right? But I mean, elk. So my big thing is like archery season. I am 90% focused on elk. Like
Hmm.
it's tough to beat. I think we can all agree it's tough to beat a September with a bow in a hand and a bull screaming in your face. And then rifle season is pretty much mule deer for me. So that's kind of how I have approached my seasons in the past, especially typically hunting Montana. Um, and so e-scouting wise, I'm most likely e-scouting for elk, just looking at new places or looking back at areas that I've hunted elk in past waypoints, past, okay, I bumped elk here, I've seen elk here, I've called in a bull here, looking at it in 3D and stuff, figuring out, okay, how's this herd traveling through this country? Like, I have all this data, and if I really just look at it from a different perspective and rotate the map around and stuff, I can maybe figure out what that herd is doing there. So typically if I'm e-scouting, it's for elk. As far as a layer goes, that's a little bit tougher of a question. I mean, if I'm e-scouting a complete new area, like in Western Montana, like the fire layer, a lot of folks say, that they hunt elk and burns and so on and so forth. But the fringes of burns, I tend to use that quite a bit. So throw on the historic wildfire layer, see what has burned, when it has burned. And Isaiah, I think you even mentioned it in like an e-scouting video last year or something. Maybe it was you, but whoever it was saying sometimes they stay away from those areas because you know, everybody has the same idea. They throw that layer on, they're like, hey, I'm going to go to the center of that burn because it's a 3-year-old burn. It's accessible. Like, there's got to be elk there. It's a burn, right? But really just hunting the fringes of those. And so, there's a lot of layers that come in handy, but I would say for new areas, that's kind of one that I definitely look at every time.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, there's, I guess what I get from new hunters, especially elk hunting, because that's what most people that want to come out west that haven't come out west when they're going into scouting an area or scouting a unit and trying to figure out, well, where do I start? Like, what am I looking for in general? Because I have no experience in this unit. I don't even know if there's elk right in here. Like, I've never been there. What is the top thing? I mean, is it the burns that you're looking at? Like, just when you look at it and it screams, this is a spot I need to look at for archery elk. I mean, both of you have probably done it a million times, looked over, you name the mapping. I mean, you've just looked at it. What screams this pocket is going to hold elk?
It's different area to area. I mean, you could be hunting elk out in the sagebrush and the breaks, or then you go to northwest Montana where it's thick timber and alderbrush. So
elk are where they are, is what you're saying.
they are where they are, but I mean, a lot of it's just collecting data over years of experience. I mean, I got big into e-scouting early on. Again, like I said, it was on Google Earth, and then Jared Lyle gave me some Forest Service map overlays, and I thought I was cheating at that point in time. And then it's like you just really dive into, I don't know, I always tell people once you figure it out, you figure it out. Like the pockets you look for, I mean, you can even find elk on online mapping platforms. It's not, I mean, I've done it multiple areas, but I don't know, it's more of a skill you develop over time, I feel like.
Yeah. It's
Like,
I kind of struggle with that question when people ask me that because it's like you said, Isaiah, when you know, but that's a horrible way of explaining it to somebody who doesn't know.
Yeah.
But it's like, you've been to these areas, so I can look at something in the breaks and be like, use something like the egg layer and say, okay, there's alfalfa fields here. There's some pretty breaky country over there. There's no timber, but based on the fact that I have seen enough elk transition from like bedding in sage flats or rolling sage and then transitioning to alfalfa and then going back, it's like I can predict there's probably elk in that area. But without being there and seeing that, I might be like, oh, there's no timber there. There's probably not going to be an elk because there's no trees for, you know, a mile or whatever. Um, like you said, once you get boots on the ground and check areas and you're like, yeah, I see elk in this type of country, you can find similar country on the map and predict that they're there. But I mean, honestly, too, like in Montana, there's rarely places that I go that you don't find some kind of elk. So, some e-scout, you're e-scouting trying to find like the best spots or where like maybe a herd with a herd bull might hole up or, you know, situations like that. But I'm also coming from a state where typically if I'm going out, like there's elk sign in the area. There might be a lot of pressure and low elk numbers, but there's going to be, plenty of elk to be had.
I don't know, Dylan. I've talked to a few people that the best layer they would use is the private public, and the public doesn't have any elk, and the private has them all. So
That's a good indication. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, the other thing, too, like if you're looking at areas with thick timber where you can't, see what's below the tree cover, like I use the topo a lot because then I look for like benches and like, then you can see actual streams and, even little water pockets and whatnot. So it just depends on the country you're looking at, but I think the topo layer is very underrated. Like I think most people just skim right over it. And then all of a sudden you start digging into it and you're like, whoa, there's a pretty sweet bench in here. Like I better go check that out. Like I've started doing that when we going shed hunting with my brothers over in Arizona in new areas, like finding those little benches on steep hillsides that you just figure, oh, those bulls might hold up here. And yeah, you go in there and it's usually pretty good.
Yeah. I think the topo is definitely underutilized, and if I had to choose one, like aerial or topo, it'd be topo 1,000% of the time. I mean, I even remember, shoot, it's been 3-4 years, but heard a bull bugle kind of midday, and you just look down and it's tree cover the entire way. It just looks like a super steep. It was actually south facing, super steep, south facing slope. And then, you throw on topo and it's like, no, there's a little knob about 3/4 of the way down. There's like a little knob that you can see with the topo, it's like 40, 50 yards long. That's like a tiny little bench in there. And I was like, that bull's got to be bugling from that. Like it just makes sense. And he torched off again. It's like, okay, he's bugling from that. Didn't get on him that day. Like 3 days in a row, hit that bull and cows were bedded right on that knob, and finally got an arrow in him. But it like, without that topo, it's like, you're pinpointing bugles and how far down is that bull? Like, should I go 100 yards and try and set up? Should I do this or that? But as soon as you look at the topo, realize there's a knob down there and he bugles again, you're like, that's where that bull is. I'd bet $1,000. So yeah, little things with the topo that you just can't get with imagery. You look at that same thing with imagery or even 3D, and it just looks like a super steep slope there with no bench involved. So yeah, I agree. A lot of folks, and too, reading topo is like one of those, it's like the same thing. Once you understand it, you understand it. But there's, it's definitely underutilized, and I think kind of not a lost art to read topo, but I don't think a lot of guys are taking full advantage of it.
Yep.
I would say it is kind of a lost art. I mean, if you grew up in today's age and never had to rely on topo or look at topo maps, you're assuming that everything you're seeing on that 3D imagery on a satellite layer is what it is. Like, you're not thinking that there's this over here. Me being the elder statesman I am, yeah.
Well, I look at a topo map sometimes and it like confuses me because you got to like look more at a broad area to figure out which way the lines are actually going.
Well, and the contour lines and the shading and things
like that.
Yeah,
because you're like, oh, it's actually going this way, not that way.
Yeah.
There's been a couple times I've been, mistaken looking at it, but yeah, it's just one of those things with like e-scouting too. It's like, once it's like, now you can just throw up a topo map and be like, oh, there's a sweet ridge and, there's a bench, like there's a saddle. It kind of just clicks and makes sense.
No, and I think it's all very species to species. Like when I'm scouting for spring bear, I never use a topo map. It's all imagery and roads and gates and like figuring out, okay, these logging roads are closed down to people driving on them, or this big avalanche chute looks good, or the south facing
Yeah.
slope. Like I never ever use a topo for that.
But you're looking for clearings. Like
Yeah.
you're looking for openings in that canopy where you can find a bear in.
Yep.
And then
And then like
also for a shooting spot,
yeah.
like I found a lot of really sweet bear spots, and then it's like, or you get there and you think there's a spot to shoot from, and you get there and you're like, well, if I don't sit, on this 50-yard clearing, like you can't shoot it anyway. So, finding, using the line tool and marking across the canyon, what is that distance? Is that within my range, and so on and so
Yeah.
forth. Another layer I use quite a bit for that is the timber cuts layer. Some states there's a lot of timber cuts, some states there's not. But you can throw that on and it will show you, even if the imagery is, a couple years old, and maybe that fresh timber cut doesn't show up on that, with that timber cut layer, you'll be able to see, okay, there was a clear cut, there was a thinning. I might be able to shoot from here and go check it out.
That is what I like. I've used that. I've used that timber cut layer quite a bit, especially when you get into some of these areas with heavy beetle kill, where they went in there and thinned those out. Not cleared them, but went in and thinned a lot of that stuff out. And it does. I mean, it makes a difference going into that. And now you have some stuff to pinpoint. And okay, if this has been thinned out, there's a pretty good chance you're going to have a little better chance in there, and they still might be some spots in there, especially for elk that they feel comfortable enough to bed down. There's still enough cover. Versus a clear cut where they might be in there for the first hour or so in the morning, but they ain't going to hang out there all day.
Well, that's just like 5 years old, where it's like a freaking dog's hair you're filtering through, and they're just hid up in there.
Yeah, but I don't like wading through dog hair.
No, there's so many tools. I mean, I rarely use that timber cut one. I get stuck in old habits and don't take advantage of stuff like that.
Well,
so.
For years, I mean, that was the hardest thing for me, was just to make the transition over to using my phone as a GPS, and realizing that it was way more beneficial to do that than have a handheld GPS. I mean, at least that's what everyone grew up with when I was, starting to branch out and going out of state. You had to have this GPS, because that's what gave you all the trail markers and things like that. And I mean, you plugged your little chip in and you would have an overlay on there. Transitioning to a phone was like, I don't know. I'm still going to keep that GPS in my pocket, because if this phone fails.
Yep. I did it for a couple of years. So I've been with onX. In August it'll be 8 years. And when I first started working at onX, like the app was out at that time, but it was early stages. Phone technology 8 years ago was not what it is today by any means. And I was in customer service, and that's a lot of the calls where, hey, I've had your guys' chip that I plug into my Garmin GPS and it works great. Like, what's up with this phone app thing? Like, I still have a flip phone, and that we still had a lot of customers then who had flip phones, and like I'm thinking about getting a smartphone so I could download the app. What advantages? What does that look like? And for probably a couple years, when I started working for onX, I still had my Garmin with a chip in it in my pack. I think I went through one whole season, like the second year of working for onX, where I never once pulled it out, turned it on, or anything. And I was like, okay, I'm done. Like, but phone technology took a little while to catch up. The app evolved. We had a few growing pains early on. And, today it's just so much different. My phone is every bit as reliable as that Garmin GPS was. And I mean, I had a Garmin Montana, which was like $600 or so at the time.
Yeah.
Add on
That was a Cadillac.
$100 chip in it. Like, it's a
Paid
big,
for
heavy
the bird's eye view.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not a small device. I don't know what they were, probably not a pound, but it felt like a pound in your hand. And it got to the point where the phone just surpassed those GPSs so far that, especially once people caught on that you can use your phone offline. To this day, I mean, that's still a huge misconception. Like, I use the phone app and I love it. It's game changer. It's incredible. But where I hunt, I don't have cell service. And, even today, it's like, you almost just want to like bang your head against the wall. It's like, no, you can use it. You just have to save that area ahead of time.
Yeah.
Um, Once people realized they could do that, it just the handheld GPS devices kind of became a paperweight, if you will.
Yeah, they really did. I mean, they're obsolete. I would say the only thing that has kept those GPSs alive are probably the inReach version of it, which has nothing to do with necessarily mapping, but I think most guys don't use that as far as a mapping tool other than to keep track of, being able to reach out to individuals through satellite communication.
And houndsmen with their
Mhm.
dog trackers and
Mhm.
stuff.
Yeah, but
Yep, and the rhinos too, to an extent. So
Yeah.
we can see where each other are, but I mean, we've definitely been working on a feature like that. So, here in the near future, I don't know exactly when, but if we go out together and I want to see where you guys are, like, if I grant you permission to see my location, like that is something we're working on. So, but yeah, like you said, the dog collars are a cool thing for those still as well. But um, yeah, it's just crazy. And the last 3 to 5 years, really, what phones and the capability has really came out with.
I'm gonna get into Isaiah's app and change it so he allows all my so I can just see where he's at all the time and be like, yeah, all right, no more secrets.
No more secrets. No, it is crazy. I mean, where technology has taken us. Like I think back when I first started hunting and guiding, I'm like, how did I even manage? Like as much as I rely on my phone now in the
I know.
field and e-scouting beforehand, it's just like what did you do back in the day?
It makes me a little nervous, honestly. Like I watch some of these little reality shows like Alone, and I see him traipsing off into this thick brush, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you are so screwed. How are you going to get back to point A when you don't even know how you made it to B and you're 2 miles in this thick timber? Because, like, I've got to the point now, I still try to pay attention to where I'm going, but you just can't help it. You get so focused on the mission, whether it's getting from point A to point B, you're trying to get to this glassing spot, or you heard a bull and you're trying to beeline it over to him. You don't really pay attention. Now all of a sudden it's dark. Like, if you get to that situation and you don't have, like me, I know if I don't have my phone and I'm not going, all right, shit, where is camp? Yeah, it's right back there. Then I can immediately figure out a line back to camp. It makes me a little nervous. I'm like, gosh, I rely so much on it anymore.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I think back over the last few years, and there has been a couple times where where I'm personally like, no, the pickup's up this ridge, and then you look at
Mm-hmm.
the map and it's not for whatever reason. It might be two ridges or the opposite direction, and it's like I feel like I've got a pretty good sense of direction and could rely without it if something happened for sure. But there has been a couple times, in fog or like you said, you're chasing a bugle through thick timber and you like just black out because you're so excited. I don't know, but then you look at the phone and you're like, that's not right. Like,
Yeah.
and then you go through this like moral thing of, okay, I knew that wasn't right, but this is what it's saying. Like, what do I trust? And obviously working at onX and having it save my butt so many times in the dark, like I trust that, and it's like, holy crap, like I was wrong. Like I would have hiked the wrong way or whatever. And that I can only think back to a couple times that kind of has happened over the last even 5 6 years, but it does once in a while. And you know there there are pros and cons with technology, especially with hunting, and I think that's a debate that a lot of folks have morally. Like what's it's kind of like long range shooting. It's like what's comfortable for you, like to be able to shoot an elk at 1,000 yards. Is that like something you're morally okay with? Some people with technology, it's like I still want to use a compass, and that's totally fine. um but the one thing that the phone does allow you to do with the app is like hunt with more confidence and spend more time doing what you're out there to do, so you can really focus on chasing that bugle and having the peace of mind to be like, okay, it's dark and I'm in the middle of a crap hole canyon. Now I can find a way out that's not going to completely exhaust me. um
Yeah.
and so the other thing too, in Montana, I think about it all the time of I think it holds people a little bit more accountable actually these days because there's so many little sections of public in Montana that there's no fences, there's no, here's a private sign, here's a public sign, so I know I'm clear. Like I think a lot of people still used to hunt those public areas. It was just like kind of more a gray area, like you're on top of a glassing knob and you're on public and you see a buck and you're like, there's no, there's no fence, there's no sign. I think that buck's on public. I'm going to shoot it. Well, now you can pull out your phone and look and see exactly for sure. I can range that buck and be like, hey, it's 350 yards. I can do a line distance from my GPS location, 350 yards, and be like, okay, well, that's the edge of public. So that buck, is probably 20, 30 yards into private or whatever. Like you have the tools today with this to hold yourself a little bit more accountable instead of just being like, well, I think it's public. Like there's no way of really knowing. Um,
There's
so
been
yeah,
a
I mean,
few
there's
times where I was wishing I didn't have my onX with me.
Yeah,
totally,
and I'm sure some of those times he's like, "What on X? Yep, looks public to me."
yeah, no. And like, one of my best whitetails, a few years ago in Eastern Montana, same thing. Like we're hunting, it was literally a quarter section by a half section of public BLM that it was like a peninsula into private. And we were glassing it, and a whitetail buck came cruising up a bottom chasing does in mule deer country. Didn't expect to see a whitetail there, and right away was like, yeah, that buck's a shooter for sure. And waited for him to cross onto when we knew it was public and shot him. And without that, it's like, you'd be guessing, 100% guessing if that buck was on private or public, or if you were on private or public. And the private round is outfitted. There's people watching. Like it's just it's so much better to know exactly, like, I was able to shoot that buck, walk up, be like, let's, sit here, drink coffee, take
Yeah.
pictures, and not being like, man, did I just make a mistake? Is there somebody watching us? Like, am I on private or public? It's like, no, we're 40 yards into, public BLM. Like it worked out perfect.
No,
Yeah.
it takes those tense situations into situations that are relaxed, they're fun. It's exciting. You can take pictures. You can, just chill out, cut the animal up, take care of it instead of just like helter skelter, get all your stuff together because you're not quite certain what's going on.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's so many states where you're driving a county road and everything's private around you, but then all of a sudden you come to where a section of BLM touches and you can hunt it or take off from there. I mean, there's so many benefits. I mean, what's the elite? $100 a year. You can get cheaper than that if you're doing the single state, but it's like for what you get out of a mapping platform with the app is like
Oh,
it's a no-brainer.
you know how many maps I have stuffed in my basement that I paid 10, 15 bucks for a piece that now that's what they do. They just sit there.
Yeah. Well, and I remember, I think it was a couple years before, I think it was like the year onX came out, and I was in high school at the time, and I actually got a GPS with a chip, like my senior year of high school. I remember this. And I pulled it up and was looking at, I mean, it was a game changer. I was mind blown. And that's just with private and public and hunting units. And even for that, like just simply to see private, public, and the hunting GMUs, like in my mind, it's still every bit as worth it. Because I was looking at an area, and the year prior, my dad and I were driving down a county road to go hunting on this piece of property that we've hunted many times. We know where the borders are. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, there's deer, but we can't hunt here. And then all of a sudden we looked over and there was like a super nice buck, like 180 type mule deer. I don't know, 400 or 500 yards off the road, threw some binos on him. And we were just like, dang, that is a great buck. Like he's in a killable spot. Like, oh, it sucks. This is private. Continue down the road. Like when I got the GPS the next year and looked at it, it was a piece of state. Like it was state land. And we had no idea. Like we've driven by it, 50 plus times, had no idea there was no sign. It might have been BLM because usually the state lands do have signs, but um, public land that we had no idea. Like that buck was super killable. And without, just knowing private and public, we just drove by. It looked like private. We're like, man, that's a bummer because that is a great buck. And, had we had onX the year before, who knows, we could have tried to get a little closer and completely screwed the situation up, but we would have had a chance to go kill a great buck on public land.
Yeah, one spot I've noticed that I've when I started hunting Colorado, it seemed like every single piece of state land was off limits. Like it was whoever leased that land, they had the hunting rights. You couldn't touch it. You couldn't do it was trespassing. If you went on there, it was trespassing. Now, with more and more of those state land sections becoming available or public hunting access, that is one thing that's awesome. Is I will just pull that up and just look and see. No public hunting access, or actually that's state land where you can hunt. Like we can hunt on that state land. I don't know what it entails to make all that happen on the back end, but just having that available, like you say, for $100, being able to know, I can go on that state land or this land over here. If I go on that state land, I'm gonna have a rancher or an outfitter breathing down my neck. Like it's a pretty big deal, and it's worth every penny.
Yeah, and like Isaiah said, I mean, for those who are listening and don't know, if you just want a single state, it's $30 a year. You get everything you need for that state. Now if you're looking at multiple states, then the elite membership is $100 a year. And I mean, a box of bullets these days are what, 70, $80, depending on what you're shooting. It's like, I just spent $450 on a new pair of boots. It's crazy what things cost. And for $100 each year to know where you can and can't hunt and have those opportunities of, you saw that 180 buck and he was on public and you went and shot that deer. It's really, to me, it's a no brainer. And it's tough sometimes because it's like, I work for onX, so of course I'm going to be an advocate, but it really is one of those things that I would pay triple for without a doubt, each year.
No, and I mean too, like I know a lot of our members, we have our 3D mapping platform online only for digital membership or any of the all exclusives. But we don't have the land ownership. So, if you want to get on and dabble and online research and 3D mapping, you can do that. But I would recommend if you're going in the field, especially today, getting the onX subscription with the land ownerships, overlays, all that. It's very beneficial.
It's a must.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It's like people start talking about, oh, there's too much hunter crowding and yeah. Yes and no. It's just like we as humans have developed our skills, our technology so much over the last decade that you're not the only one figuring out all these little secret spots anymore. There's hundreds of other people doing the same thing now. And if you know what you're looking for, you're not the only one.
The cool thing is I feel like Huntin' Fool can put onX in the same boat. Like we often get accused of ruining draw odds across the West, for people by giving them more information and telling them where to apply and where not to apply and what states have these and what states don't. onX is ruining thousands of honey holes.
We hear it for sure. Like, absolutely understand where folks are coming from there. Because if you had especially like an easement, right? Until recently, those easements were pretty hard to find. A lot of it was like word of mouth, and then you confirm it, whatever. But an easement through private into some public, like if folks had that, and now I can just pull up the map and zoom in and be like, oh, sweet, there's an easement there. Click on it, see, what the limitations are, and then go hunt that. Like, I totally understand where that first person is coming from. That was a honey hole for years, and now that information is accessible. But
how did you find this spot?
You can say that with anything, though. I mean, it's the rifle technology capabilities, the rangefinder stuff. Like it's definitely changing the game. But what's nice about the app is for that person who might have lost a honey hole, you can go find 5 more using the app. Like there's 100%. A lot of hunters finding some cool access spots these days, but there's still a lot of cool honey holes to be found out there.
Yep. No, I would recommend to anyone. I mean, if it's something you're serious about, just spending as much time as you can on any, mapping platform to start to figure it out. And then over time you'll develop skills and you can drop on different layers. And I mean, to me, it's all about time. And I mean, the more time you put into it, the better you're going to get at it. So
For sure. And to kind of go full circle back to, the first question of folks who probably haven't e-scouted much or haven't been out west, it's like, I mean, my biggest advice would be e-scout as much as you can, mark out, 4 or 5 different potential areas in the unit that you have to hunt, and then be mobile. Like, I early on would be like, okay, I need to hike 5 miles in or 4 miles in before I set up a tent and hunt that area. Well, that's great if I know there's elk there, but if I don't know there's elk there and I go do that, my whole long weekend is shot if there's no elk there. Like, yeah, you can hike out, go drive to a different area, but you've already invested time and energy to get into an area. So you almost feel like you need to grind it out and turn up, that herd of elk that's got to be in there somewhere. Whereas, like, if, you mark 3 or 4 areas, go, hike a mile into that area. Is there any sign? What does it look like? If there's nothing, if there's a bunch of hunters, no sign, no bugling, pull the plug, get out, go check out area 2 and be mobile until you find elk. And then you can start to put it together because, it's like, okay, I checked out these 3 areas. There's no elk. The 4th area, there was 2 herds of elk. What's different about that area? Is it like a lack of pressure? Is it topography? Like, what's different? And the more you start to figure that out and run into elk or deer or whatever it is, then you can start to replicate that on the map to find other, similar areas. But that would be my recommendation, is just like e-scout, but don't overcommit and like waste, who knows, you could commit and it could be a killer hunt, but you could also commit, there not be elk there, and then, your week that you drove out to Colorado for is now coming to a close and you've been stuck hunting the same 4 miles for 5 days.
Yeah.
You can always give Garth a call too, because he can just put you right in the hot spot.
Point on a map.
Yep.
Point on a map. Well, it's a long game, right? To your guys' point, when you're out in the field and you notice differences and you notice things, make a note of it. Like, it's easy to do now. Before, I can't tell you how many books I read back in the day where, and people still do this, they take journals with them and they write down, different things they know. But if you take a picture of that canyon and then you make a note in there of why you took the picture, if you saw elk there, if you didn't see elk there, if there was a lot of sign in there but there was nothing in there, like, down the road you might look back at that and say, well, hell, I was in there the end of September. There was a ton of sign in there, but I could tell it was a little old. If it was a couple of weeks old, maybe that's a hot spot, earlier on in September or even the end of August. Who knows? But make those notes while you're out there, and then once you kind of go long term and you start to notice these things pop up, it's going to make sense a lot more to you.
Yeah. No, and that is where, all joking aside, we can step in and help. Like, if you're new to it and you spend some time e-scouting and you drop some points and you're planning your hunt out in Colorado, Montana, Idaho, wherever, like, give us a call. Like, there's been a ton of times where I've gotten on a phone call with a guy and he's like, hey, I'm looking at this spot. And I'm like, it's not what I would probably look for. Like, I would maybe look at this area instead, and these are the reasons why. And it's just because, we fortunately get to spend a ton of time in the field each year, and, it's just knowledge you start to gain year after year. I know the first few years I got into it, like, a lot of it was a total waste of time. Like, showing up in an area being like, oh, this is going to be awesome. And then it was like, nope, not at all.
Plenty of those.
Yeah, and it's not like a magic wand. You just wave and make marks or drop waypoints on your app and show up there. Like, it's boots on the ground.
Hey, when it happens, it's cool, though.
It is.
You're like, God, I nailed this spot so right.
Well, that's what I mean. Like, the more experience you get, the more times you're going to have those experiences where you're like, man, I nailed this. Like, when I first started bear hunting back in Montana, spring bear, it was like I started, doing my research, talking to people, and it was like I wasn't getting it dialed in. But then once I got it dialed in, like, now I just feel like there's not a spot I can't be like, this looks good, I'm going to go there and find a bear. Like, it's just knowledge over years and years of, trial and error and
cocky.
Yeah, pretty soon you get there.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And spring bear is one of those hunts or species that like once you figure out, you figure it out. Like,
Yeah.
the first I moved to Western Montana from Eastern Montana when I took the job for onX, and it was kind of a goal of mine. I'd never hunted bears, didn't know anything about hunting bears, especially in the mountains in the springtime. And the first like 2 years, like I was like seeing 1 to 2 bears. Like I was getting out quite a bit, and I was not finding bears. And you hear a lot of guys even today and gals like, there. I just don't think there's many bears in this area. Like I've been out 12 times and I've seen one bear, and it was 4 miles away. And it's like once you figure it out, it just kind of clicks and you're like, now you can go have a 40, 50 plus bear spring. You're seeing multiple bears a night and stuff. And a lot of it is due to e-scouting. It's like, hey, I know this year based on the snowpack or whatever, I'm going to look here, and then maybe that doesn't work. So you look at, spot 2 or 3, you see 2 bears that night and you're like, okay, now I got it. Like I have the elevation, I have the terrain, like it's a little bit different than last year, but it's similar. And it's like, you just replicate that and you just keep seeing bears, almost every night. So it definitely, yeah, spring bear is kind of that thing too, that the learning curve is there, but once you figure it out, there's a lot more bears out there than what people think.
Yeah. No, that's the thing. Like, if I was, elk, archery elk, and spring bear are the two species I feel like I have dialed in. But like with mule deer, late season elk, like I'm always asking Garth or other guys, like, hey, does this look decent? Just because it's not what I've put a ton of time and energy into. And I think with the late season elk too, it is another one of those things. Like once you start to dial in what you're looking for, it you can make it happen.
Yeah. Roadless
Totally.
layers.
And I'm the same way. Yeah, I'm the same way with late season elk though. I am way more confident with a bow in my hand in September on elk than I am with, a very capable rifle and a lot of practice. And, November, I'm like, I might bump into some elk up here and get a shot on a bull, but I'm the exact same way. And it's mostly because I just don't prioritize that, or I haven't done it, enough to feel proficient in it. So I'm like kind of shooting in the wind a little bit for late season elk.
Yeah, as always, we're here to help. I know onX has a great platform, Huntin. We can do our best as well. So, if you have any questions planning this season's hunts or future years, feel free to give us a call. Download the onX map. Check us out online. Garth always is here to help you get in the field, show you right where to go.
Every day.
Every day. You've helped a lot of people over the years, Garth.
I hope so. I hope there's more that I've helped than hurt. Sometimes I get that phone call where like, hey, bro, I don't know what you told me, but it was wrong. I'm like, God, well, I tried.
No, you were wrong. So, yeah.
You've helped me quite a bit, so it's appreciated.
Good.
So, as always, give us a call here in the office if you have any questions. 435-865-1020. And we hope you all have a great summer and gearing up for this fall.